Everybody's watching March Madness, I take it. Yeah?
I'm mad I'm mad every month of the year. I don't
No one
need
else
any...
was... You're not shocked by San Diego State just creeping in?
I know the Kings won and Pittsburgh Penguins won the other night, but that's...
Oh, here we go.
I watched the more important part of March Madness, the NIT, championship. So,
what's the NIT championship?
It's the participation trophy of March Madness. It's for the people that weren't good enough to get ranked. So they have a tournament for it.
So they just get their awards based on their wit. So it's the Nitwit Award?
Yes.
No. What precipitated you getting involved in that?
I was at a bar and they were showing it, and so I was like, "Oh, cool, the participation trophy."
It all makes so much sense to me now. He was getting a drink on somewhere, and it just happened to be playing in the background, which I think is basically, you could attribute most of your education to that same fact.
I am an ASU student, so yeah. You know what? I don't care. I was an ASU student. So.
Yeah, I ceased to be affiliated, so I'm past the point of no return on this.
What
Party
are they gonna
school,
do?
Yes.
Expel me? I like to see them try. I've been there longer than anyone else has.
I predated President Crow.
The professors, yeah.
I got tenure as a student.
I paid so much money in parking that I might as well have erected a whole entire wing. They're gonna name it after me.
I am Lot 59. They have named it after me.
Wow, that is a deep cut, Tempe joke that very few people are going to appreciate. But as someone who had to enjoy reciprocal parking from time to time, I have parked my fair share at Lot 59 and walked into the middle of campus.
Have fun with a 20-minute walk to anywhere.
Exactly.
Anywhere.
In some of the most aggressive and crazed driving that I have ever seen in my life, because anybody on university is essentially out to commit vehicular manslaughter.
They're either trying to get themselves killed or trying to kill someone else. So,
no doubt. If only Doc were to join in, he could, criticize their technique.
Yeah, Lot 59. Yeah, I don't even get me started on my memories of Lot 59.
Man, if they had only just laid that asphalt in a more straightforward fashion, and the lines are crooked. I got down and measured them myself. I had my ruler out,
spot.
My compass, and
I believe regulations call for each parking space to be 4 feet wide, and some of those are 3.8, and that is just absurd.
And he would know. He went to school for 3 years on parking space distances.
That's correct. Yeah, I'm halfway to my journeyman as a parking meter maid.
And your FAFSA ASCAB is just in the mail. We're waiting for that to make it to you. But, speaking of things that don't easily fit into a spot, by the eternal, behold, it's the Disinformed podcast. I'm Shane.
And I'm Michael.
Oh, back on our bullshit here. Okay.
I thought we nailed it.
Well, allow me to be critical for once. I think you might be able to marginally adjust your timing.
Oh, I don't know. I think we nailed it. And speaking of nails, I would know.
I studied to be a carpenter, like Christ before me. The only two perfect people in existence, myself and the risen Lord.
Well, I'm glad that my reputation precedes me.
Indeed, yes.
That's why we have you on the show.
Far from perfect.
In more news on purportedly magical Jews, Michael, I hear that you have some excellent news to share with us, because we have alluded to the fact that you are shaking the shackles of Ass University, and I'm sorry, ASU, and you have some very interesting developments in your life that we get to share with the listening audience.
Oh, that's so bizarre that I actually get to share that here. I've been ignoring it for so long.
I know, Bob Lazar before you. You're taking your talents to South Beach.
Yes, exactly. South Beach University, SBU. No, I got a great offer to do a summer internship at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, or LANL, because it just rolls off the tongue, LANL.
How about Yanni?
Yanni?
Yanni or LANL?
LANL.
Both.
I like it.
Both.
Okay. Oh, you heard both. Okay, that's impressive.
Congratulations, sir.
Did I date that too far back?
No, I got it.
Okay,
all
right.
Yeah,
fabulous.
The dress is blue-green, in my opinion. So yes.
Aquamarine. That's we'll go with that.
No gold.
Yes, congratulations. Very excited for you.
Yeah. So that will not in any way reflect this podcast in any way, shape, or form. So I'm just gonna. Yeah. I'm just gonna lead it to reflect it. I'm a physicist. Reflection is important,
Yes, I
That's
understand.
How mirrors
Swamp
work.
gas.
Yeah.
That's how you and Bob Lazar both got into trouble, because those are not UFOs. It's just light reflecting off of swamp gas.
They're all weather balloons that we apparently now consider hostile targets. So shoot those
Do
down.
we let them go halfway across the country first?
Well,
we
want to
make sure that we kill the right people when we blow them up. That's my investment of time, certainly. As long as it's not on the West Coast time, I'm happy.
Was that I read that one of those weather balloons was the first confirmed takedown of one type of aircraft that we have. It was the first confirmed kill. I can't remember the specifics, but it was one type of airplane that we use in the Air Force. Their only confirmed kill was an airplane, or was one of those weather balloons, and I just find that absolutely hilarious. It's like a $1 million plane, and that's the first confirmed kill. Was it took down
It's a shame that the balloon couldn't have gone a little bit higher, because if it maybe crossed a certain altitude, maybe this could have gone from the Air Force and been Space Force's first confirmed kill.
True. Oh yeah, they need some more experience.
They need a win.
Definitely need a W.
Okay, well, first world problems. We're over here complaining about not having an appropriate amount of artillery being fired off over our country. And meanwhile, folks over in the Ukraine right now are looking forward to nuclear armament. So I suppose perspective is interesting. But speaking of nuclear weapons, that is what Michael is going to be working on as he's moving over into Lanel.
Yeah,
from my understanding, yes, you're joining Oppenheimer's deadly regime over there.
Exactly. So I was kind of hinting things with the heavy water episode, and we're going to be remaking the atomic bomb. The Atomic Bomb 2, Electric Boogaloo is what the program is called. Very creative name, and I'm really excited to be part of it.
And I'm going to be test mining for uranium up here to help make that a reality. So it's a full-fledged frontal assault here.
Exactly, and it's going to be fun.
And I'm building my bomb shelter, which is why I was in the crawl space earlier.
Yep, and critiquing all the carpentry that is going on underneath.
Oh dear, here we go.
As known in the pre-roll.
Gonna have a difficult time cuddling up with all the bodies down there, friend, but at least you'll be able to stay warm.
Well, that's the insulation. That's the insulation. So this summer internship, how far, what's the plan after that? Once it's done?
Man, you always want a 5-year plan from everybody.
What are you, Stalin?
What's the next step in the process here?
Another 5-year plan.
No, it's just a question I ask. It's what I think. I always develop plans for myself.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years, Doc?
So, like any superhero, I will take off the mantle, place my uniform over the fireplace, and then retire back to civilian life.
He's going to buy a recreational vehicle and will it to his daughter. That's the only reasonable thing to do.
Drive throughout the country, or what is left of it.
Following the bombs, yes.
Yes.
Because the Atomic Bomb 2, Electric Boogaloo, it's gonna be fire. To quote the youths.
On the subject of things going nuclear, I listened to last week's show, so I can definitely speak to that. But I'm excited, because I saw John Wick 4 last week, which I'm not going to offer any review of for the sake of offending someone's delicate sensibilities here. So I'm just going to keep my opinions to myself and let everybody else suss that out on their own. But they had the Oppenheimer trailer that went on before it, and I was very excited. But it certainly speaks to the audience I believe that I was going to be ensconced in for the next 3 hours when we were sitting there, and they were jubilantly thrilled over the film about it's a Finnish person or a Swedish person who's just decimating Nazis. It is the next film that is from the producers of John Wick. It's just a guy who's rolling around with a shovel and a small dog, just dispatching Nazis en masse. Okay,
have
we'll
not
have to
heard
see
of
if we can
this.
track this down for the After Dark. I forget the title of the film, but
Okay.
yeah, it's very gore heavy. There's people being sent to test fields for mines and then just blowing up and ragdolling. Yeah.
Ragdolling? Okay.
So
as
the
a physics
audience
student, I do enjoy a good ragdoll. So
naturally
Mhm.
one of my favorite Aerosmith songs. In any event, the crowd was raucous for that. Loved watching people be dismembered, but we get to, Oppenheimer where we can wipe out, whole swaths of people, and they're like, I don't want to see that. The two gentlemen in front of me in particular were very vociferous and saying, like, I don't know why anybody would want to watch that. Like, well, those who forget history are condemned to repeat it, so I can see why you'd be wanting to run away from it.
I mean, the atomic bomb version 1.0 didn't really dismember or ragdoll anyone. It kind of just vaporized them, which is why I'm going in, this summer to help with the atomic bomb 2.0, because one of the things that we want to focus on is ragdolling and dismemberment. We don't want to vaporize people because, no one wants to see shadows on, walls of where people used to be when the atomic bomb went off, right?
Yeah.
People want to see ragdoll. That's why people love
what shape are you going for now? Because the mushroom cloud is so overdone.
Well, I think they're trying to model something on Goat Simulator, if I recall, because with all the ragdolling that's going to be happening, you want to at least
reference.
Thank you.
That was a good simulation. They so they actually had developed Goat Simulator for pre-tests long before I was involved on this project of just seeing how a goat can be subjected to forces. And I think it is a very realistic physics simulator for goats being flung around. So yeah, that was actually a good callback. I don't even think I mentioned Goat Simulator.
Well, I was interested in it because I initially thought it was Goat Stimulator. I had misread and spent a little more time than I needed to on that. But, it was still fun.
It happens more often than you think. People they assume that there's a T in simulator and they just they're all in. They're all in. I can't even tell you the other project that they had to scrap, in early access, Cow Simulator. That too many people downloaded it and thought the wrong thing. They even thought that they could practice it in real life. So there was a large, there was a lot of people that were just stealing giant latex gloves in preparation for the game.
Yeah, I was raised in rural Arizona. I know all about stimulating cattle, and I've been cow tipping.
You're really milking this for all it's worth, aren't you?
Indeed. And I'm lactose intolerant.
Oh,
no. That's why I pushed him over. It was a milkshake. But on the subject of Oppenheimer and bracing for impact on that, pardon the pun, I had gotten a little thought in my head. So when I used to reach out for initial conversations when I was on dating apps, I would ask about time travel.
Oh, no.
And if individuals could, in an 11/22/63, if it all, head back in time, where would you like to go and what would you like to experience? I will throw that same thing because I know that we're all into history here. So for the folks on the call, is there a segment of time, or at least in historical context, that you would be willing to go back and experience empirically? But bear in mind that I'm not sure would be able to get you back. So if you're going back, it's like a weeping angel touched you. You're just going to be there. We've absorbed your energy, and you just get to experience history from that point forward.
Well, we still get to talk from an extreme position of privilege, because really we could get thrown back at any point, and the three of us are probably okay. Whereas I think that stipulation there would significantly limit the choices for a large percentage of the population who would say,
you do make a fine point.
Guess I'd go back maybe within the last 10 years.
Can I go forward? Can I go negative years in the past? Is that possible?
We don't have the technology yet, but we're still trying.
Well,
if you drink long enough, Michael, which I believe has been your plan all along, you can still time travel. You just won't experience time the way everyone else has. It's like you're going to be in stasis for at least 8 to 12 hours.
I was going to say, it's like that movie Click, where he just keeps hitting the fast forward button. All of a sudden, years pass by, and you're like, "Well, how did that happen?" That's been me. Doc, I think you should answer yours because I think mine, based off of the conversation that we've had leading up to this point, is quite obvious.
Oh, Michael's going to tell us when the Mongols ruled China.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Pre-roll. Oh, my one weakness.
Oh, that's a really good question, Shane. I mean, it really depends, like, I guess, the mood that I'm in any particular day of the week, I suppose. I think that I guess
you wouldn't want to go see the Cherry Poppin' Daddies right when they start. You wouldn't want to try and be one of them. Well,
so to backtrack here, you said observe it empirically, but then we also said you might get stuck back there. So I'm assuming that we're not just there as like an outside observer.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
I think explaining a little bit of the plot of 11/22/63 might be a little bit more context, just because that was the basis that you were forming the question around.
The difficulty of that is that he can come back, however. So
I guess that is fair. He could reset that.
Yeah, I was more, since we had been talking about Doctor Who recently and we were getting into the sci-fi of it all and we're talking about history, I do want there to be some stakes in the hypothetical here, because if it's just, you can frivolously bop around through space and time.
You could just keep resetting the day.
Yeah, it can be a lot of fun and you get to just kind of enjoy everything as it happens. But I feel like putting that little bead, and to the point that Doc was alluding to, like, I would love I'll give you my example up front for the thing I think of. I'm a goon about the 1950s, just conceptually speaking, and that's one of the reasons 11/22/63 and it really speak to me, is that it's kind of ensconced in that time, and we always tend to look back on it as though it's like it's the photo album period for the United States, because everything, it's black and white and it's pristine, everything's wonderful, but there's this really insidious undercurrent of horrible things happening in America at that time. And so it's very interesting, just sort of the juxtaposition of those two fronts within the US culture. But also there's so many things happening just from a cultural standpoint of like music that starts to be made and movements that you get to see happen organically, that if I was going to get stuck back there, I would love to experience that. It was like, I would absolutely take a trip across the pond, watch the first few performances of the Pink Floyd sound, and watch as that sort of morphed. I'd get to see Black Sabbath in its original incarnation. You'd get to just kind of cherry pick moments that are upcoming, but I would also be living in a world where we were going to have race riots, and there's going to be a lot of civil unrest and a lot of really horrific experiences that would occur. So you do kind of have to take the one with the others. Like, as much as I would enjoy a lot of these things, there's going to be some really difficult experiences, but I would also bypass a couple world wars. Yeah. And that's really nice. So,
you'd also heavily benefit from the lack of stress that a lot of people would be suffering from back then, in terms of having the foreknowledge that, the Cuban Missile Crisis isn't going to amount to anything. There isn't, everybody's having to worry about ducking under their desks and whatnot, and that a nuclear bomb could, happen at any time. And you will know that won't happen. So you won't have that kind of overhead fear that everybody kind of lived in, and there's a cloud that was over everybody.
Unless we've created an alternate reality by going back in the time stream here, which is, all the fun of physics that Michael will be very tickled by.
Timey-wimey, loosey-goosey.
Well, saddle theory and all those realities just crumbling in on one another. I got the eye roll. Well done. Okay. I know I'm hitting the PowerPoints.
So I think
never mind.
To answer the original question, I think your answer was very close to, like, I think that for me, I'd either choose the 1950s. Although I think that I would actually I'm going to stick with the 1920s, because I wouldn't want to go any further back, because going further back in time, like if it was just as an outside observer where I'm not like actively engaged with anybody there and have the easy ability to, come back, I would love to like step into the 1850s, 1860s and see the build up to like the Civil War and meet, try to meet with leaders, or at least observe the inner workings of what's going on there. But at the same time, if I don't have just an easy, pantry way that I can walk through to come back to the present time, I will immediately regret choosing the 1860s the moment I have to use a washroom.
The moment you have a cold, like, shit, this is how I die.
Exactly. And so I think the 1950s is a great choice, and I would want to choose that, with the exception of, if I stepped into the 1950s, then I will actively be in, I'll still be alive and into spots that I have memories of currently. Like I'll remember the late 80s, the 90s and stuff. Well, yes, true. Yeah. Potentially.
Optimistically speaking.
Yeah. True. The potential exists where I could step into times that I have memories of. Mm-hmm. And so although that's exciting, I think that I'd rather kind of step back into the 1920s, avoid the horrors of World War I, engage in the roaring 20s, have the knowledge that the Great Depression is coming, the Wall Street market's going to crash. With that knowledge, being able to pull my investments out early.
Narrowly avoid starving.
Yeah,
October 27th. It sounds like a great time to pull out now.
That's right. and
in spite of the fact the banks are still probably going to collapse, however, if you've got money in a mattress somewhere.
But the wealthy were still fine through the 30s. And so with that knowledge ahead of time, I could, still live a very comfortable life in the 30s. And to the point that we talked about with the 50s, have the foreknowledge of what's going to happen during World War II, be too old to worry about being drafted or anything by that point. So I wouldn't have that. Yeah. So I wouldn't have that worry going on. And I know that we would come out victorious, assuming that, my being there hasn't altered it somehow. And then I'd get to experience the 1950s and 60s, and really just theoretically anyways, assuming I, have a good life. And then just when, my natural life is probably petering out, is the time period in which I don't have any memories of currently. So to me, the 20s would be kind of the ideal, because I could really hop in there. And I'd love to see the, the flapper dresses and, the bootlegging that's going on, and just all of that. And the music itself, I still love, the 1920s music, and going into the hot jazz and moving into the 30s and 40s and stuff. So I think that's the earliest I'd go back.
And you could see the formulation of the great American jazz band, as Michael is so fond of discussing.
Well, they kind of started around a little bit earlier than that, if I recall correctly.
Just being silly.
You can say that you listened to them before they were cool. Start the definition of a hipster early.
The 1920s hipster.
Oh man,
how East Egg of you.
Well, my hat of choice would fit right in. Same with you, Shane. Actually,
I can be bald in any time period. It's thankfully.
I meant our newspaper
say,
boy caps.
I thought for some reason I thought a trilby.
It's a pub cap for me. Thank you.
Exactly. That is not 1920s. Thank you. That is late 1800s. Okay.
Angry Irishmen. Yes. Which are timeless. Yeah.
True. Any year.
All right. So Michael, round it up here. What's going to happen?
Well, I'm considering that we were talking about Oppenheimer, and I'm a slut for physics stuff. I actually would go to the 40s. I would want to be part of the Manhattan Project, even though I know that the outcome was really, really unfortunate and really bad. So before anyone starts saying anything about that,
no one's listening. You're fine.
That's fair.
Wait, sorry. Did the premise involve us being able to choose important events that we could interject ourselves into? So you'd go back to the 40s, but also get to put yourself on the Manhattan Project?
Well, I think if you're going back to, immerse yourself in that time, something that we're not talking about, I think is implicit in here, is you do have, as you alluded to, a foreknowledge of upcoming events. So who's to say I can't say that I think there's a film where this happened fairly recently, I write every Beatles song that was ever penned.
Yes.
Right.
You can insert yourself and be ahead of the curve on a lot of these things. So I think Michael, having foreknowledge of current
Good point.
physical premises and things like this, and knowing some scientific principles that may have not been stumbled upon yet, could probably fake some documentation and ingratiate himself with the folks on the Manhattan Project. It's not outside the realm of possibility.
No, that's a really good point.
And even who knows, if I want to try and be as optimistic as possible, I can even try and influence where the bomb is dropped. Maybe it doesn't need to be dropped over a population center that kills tens of thousands of people. Maybe it just demonstrate like how a lot of people do nowadays, where they just drop a bomb random places like North Korea, just shooting missiles wherever they please, as long as it doesn't kill anyone.
See, now, that would
they
be
did
fascinating.
test it.
Yeah, that would be fascinating though, because yours, like, so Shane kind of just referenced stepping back into the 50s and kind of being able to view certain things.
Yeah, as all of mine are superficial naturally. We're not getting into substance.
No, same with mine. Mine going into the 20s there,
There's
outside of making myself wealthy and then just kind of like refraining from any action, I don't think that I would have too much dramatic impact either. But you bring a really interesting point, Michael, because like if you were into a position where you could maybe choose a different location for the bomb, there could be the implications of that could be fascinating, because without that huge death toll and the kind of the horrific, impact of that, would the USSR be as scared of like, the US and the power of the bomb there if it was just a test? Would the Cold War escalate further? Would it go to a hot war without that kind of scary threat overhanging it? So that's interesting.
Or would Michael even survive? Because if he walks in with poorly fabricated papers, they'll just assume that he is a German spy and just dispatch him immediately.
Yes, which would be quite hilarious. Like, I'm like, all right, guys, I'm here to change history. And they're like, you're a spy. Like,
where were you born?
Peoria, Arizona. That doesn't exist. There's like 5 people living there. It's a farming community. Get out of here.
Yep. It's one of the things that I love that 112263 addresses is the idea that the past essentially is obdurate and does not want to be changed. And so if you start going in, that's probably why I think my brain was kind of a little more catered to the fact of just being an observer and sort of voyeuristically watching history pass by initially. But I think you would absolutely have difficulty refraining from trying to wriggle your finger in once or twice of just like, maybe we can change this, or hey, maybe I can get in front of this and I can invest in Microsoft before anybody else is paying attention, having just read The Dark Tower again recently. So
with your wanting to like be an observer, Shane, would any part of you or you, Michael, be tempted to like go back and see your grandfather or grandmother and in a younger state?
I think so, but I think there's a portion of wanting to travel and see new things and explore different experiences that if I have to backtrack to the Great Appalachian Hills or the area where I grew up, it's like, well, I know this. Yeah, they're interchangeable essentially, at least from a mental standpoint. So yeah, I think I would probably want to go and see things that I hadn't already somewhat experienced. But yeah, eventually, if I'd been there for long enough, if I want to hang around and witness my own birth, then that might be a very interesting fly on the wall scenario to kind of float in, see my father wringing his hands and like, I can't believe I did this again.
Why?
It'd be interesting. So like, especially coming from my more recent and within the last year, really working towards, trying to build like future wealth for like, my daughter and stuff, and not having any of that. I think that if I went back to the 20s, like my grandparents were born in like 47, I think. And I only like knew them for the first 10 years or so of my life. So I'd be super tempted to like go visit my great grandparents and see the birth of, my grandparents, and then kind of, see my grandfather when he's younger. And then, to your point of like, seeing your father there, like I'd be kind of tempted to like peek in and see like what the relationship looked like between my mom and my dad. Cause he took off before I was born, but like before I was around in the belly, like, how'd they get along, and just kind of be the fly on the wall to witness that. And then probably try to, take the dabblings of wealth that I gained from cashing out before the before the Wall Street crash, and then just pre-build that generational wealth so that, little Michael there in the 1980s is already benefiting from all that instead of being the cockroach commando.
Yeah. It's a really interesting prospect to kind of throw on the wall and see what sticks and where your mind kind of goes. And it obviously I don't think that you could just walk back and be independently wealthy to just say like, yeah, wherever I wind up, I can get on a plane or jump on a boat and I'll be over in the UK and experience all these things. And also not thinking about what the political climates are worldwide as these things are going on, because you never know when you're going to run into a militaristic coup or some other sort of difficult thing that I didn't pay attention to in history. But I think the primary thing that thrills me about the concept with 112263 versus today is I like the simplicity that is somewhat inherent. Now, you could call that ignorance if you want to by another name, but in a world where we're not connected by the internet, where we don't have the telephonic, lines that are running all around the world, where we still have to stroll into a library to look up information. Like, I think there is a part of me that has seen that the leaps and bounds from the innovation on the electronic front that kind of I would be interested to see whether or not it was idyllic and as immersive, or if we were better or worse to one another just on a sociological stance than I presume we are. And that would be fascinating to me, just from a stance of going back as someone who's just as an arbiter going, maybe anthropologically speaking, was the, condition of socialism within the United States as bad as we thought it was at the time? And whether we interacted with one another a little bit better, and seeing, of course, the racial distinctions and the class distinctions and all those things firsthand, because there's a lot of really gray underpinnings that happen over the course of that story. And at the same time, there's a lot of really wonderful spirit and characters that are there. And I think it's emblematic of every other experience we have, where it's like, you're going to meet some really great people. You're going to meet some really horrible people. You're going to have some really wonderful experiences, and you're going to meet some very insidious and horrible human beings over the course of that span. So just, it's a fascinating thing to think of. But I think when information is not just so readily available at your fingertips, to see how people actually interacted with one another at that time, where you can't just immediately fact check. And since we're on a show where we talk about lying to one another routinely, kind of fascinating to see how, knowing what the actualities are, if you get into a conversation with someone from the government, like, hey, so do you happen to have any paper clips laying around, and watch someone's eyes kind of get wide, like, what are you talking about? Oh, I have no idea. There any German geneticists floating around behind these doors here? Or, I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, it's definitely an interesting thought piece, because it's, especially using 112263 as an example, because comparing that to like the Back to the Future side of the fence, right? Do you just go back and pick up cheap meat and take advantage of the simplicity of life, that, you can have the good quality food at a really cheap price and just indulge in like the simple life benefits of like 1122? Or do you bring an almanac back with you and like know all the scores and, bet on everything and cash in from that, like the Back to the Future side? So it's definitely an interesting swing. I think that if I was stuck in the past and couldn't come back, I think I would do the almanac. I think if I had the ability to just easily pop back, I think that I would do Stephen King's version, where I would just go in there and indulge in the nice simplicities, but then be able to come back to the modern trappings.
Well, and they do the almanac in 112263 as well, as kind of like a ripcord of, if you desperately need money, here are major sporting events that you can kind of bet on to kind of wiggle your way through. But even that, I feel that was one of the few things that the miniseries did really well, was show just the side eye that would be cast at you as you're coming in as a fresh face that no one is familiar with no one to vouch for you. You don't have a line of credit that people can readily check. You don't have a credit score that anybody's keeping track of. Yeah. You can make up a social security card if you need to. Like, so walking into a room with people who are known thugs, and then having to try to masquerade in front of them, like, I just, babe in the woods here. I just want to place a bet that seems completely outrageous to you for a ridiculous amount of money, and you trust me to do this and will not do any horrible things to me. And it's like, the second you place the bet, they're following you out of there. Yeah. So there are interesting perils and pitfalls to a lot of this that you don't really think of until it's on its feet. So just fun thought exercise.
I wonder, like, do you think with kind of the evolution of technology since 1122. Do you think if he was writing it now, he would set it up perhaps where, let's say you leave the pantry door slightly cracked, and so your Wi-Fi still picks up, so you could walk around with your phone and have your Wi-Fi signal to pull it out and still Google whatever you want, so long as that pantry door is slightly ajar and you're within your Wi-Fi range or something?
I find it a lot more fun to leave kind of the dark alleyways of your own ignorance present in the storytelling, because if you have just kind of a rough and ready answer for everything where you can go like, oh, well, just let me look at please turn away, non-time traveler, while I pull out my anachronistic material. Yeah, it would be a little, I think that's part of the joys of it, is going back without having that entrapment where it's like, okay, I can't rely upon these things to help me, like, you know, the calculator disease of I can't do sums in my head because I'm so reliant on the technology. It would be nice to kind of get away from some of that. And as somebody who's trying to self-isolate as much as humanly possible these days, I think I like that kind of perspective of being able to just be anonymous and float back through time and see things purely as an observer, as opposed to feeling like I have an obligation to be involved in things, because I tripped through the rabbit hole and now I get to have fun and not pay attention to anybody.
Yeah, and I thought 11/22/63 came out like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was like 15.
It was like 2009, 2011.
Yeah. So there was still those things in there, but I think the way that he had structured it, and not to get into any sort of connections to Dark Tower or any of that, because there are references to Dark Tower.
Yeah.
It is a completely separate thing. Like, light doesn't go in, like nothing really permeates. You can move yourself through, but I think from a purely literary standpoint, I agree with Shane in that he didn't really want there to be that sort of access, and that once you go back, there's nothing leaking through. The only time something goes through is when someone walks through, like those kind of curtains that kind of separate like frozen areas in like a store, or like a big area, you know, where it's like it's supposed to keep things from going in and out, like it's supposed to
kind
keep
of insulated,
the temperature.
right?
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, insulated. So I think like, because if you could just walk over there and just like Google some answers and stuff like that kind of ruins any sort of preparation that he would do, because that was like a big kind of deal that had to be addressed, in that like he had to, before he was able to go back, sure, but when he went back, he had to, you know, understand that once I go in, time progresses for me normally, because that was the main kicker, was that, you know, he can reset back to that time, back to that exact time every time, but he can't fast forward. He has to start at that same point every time. So if he wanted to go to 63, he had to live
that long.
Yeah, it was
he came in 58.
58, that's what
so
it was.
You got
so it was
5 years of sticking around. And like Al had tried to game plan that as much as humanly possible, and he was kind of standing on the shoulders of his preparation to facilitate his ability to navigate that. But then the fact that he had to go in kind of semi-blind. And then you do have the experimental phase where he wants to try impacting an event himself to see if it does change and what the repercussions are and all that. It's a really well done book.
It really is. I agree.
You make a fun tangential sort of beeline, though, that I was thinking of as I read through The Dark Tower again, which is I've always kind of treated 11/22/63 as a standalone story. Like, I didn't like to think about the permutations, but I think the last time that I had read 11/22/63, having read The Dark Tower and all the ephemera to completion, is sitting here and going like, okay, so the yellow card man is wearing an overcoat that is shockingly similar to how the low men are described over the course of that story, and we are talking about doors that go to different times and places, which is something that is listed pretty thoroughly through the course of the Dark Tower storyline, particularly when you get into the Crimson King's men. And I'm like, that is fascinating if you're talking about this as being like a doorway that they weren't familiar with, or a doorway that was broken and malfunctioning and they knew that it was happening, so they just post up low men to try to, you know, monitor it. So you can treat it as a completely isolated story, or you can loop it into Dark Tower lore and then start thinking about all of the different sort of sloughing that occurs from that in the story, particularly when you relate it to like You Are as a short story, which it like the mind reels. It's a lot of fun to play with, but I speak mostly to Michael. Did you get a chance to read that yet? Did you read You Are yet?
No, I had not.
That was the one where it was the Kindle that accesses material written on all different planes of existence, and the Lowmen showed up.
We had talked about it, but I haven't read it. I haven't read any tangential things to the Dark Tower series.
Okay.
I've only read that. Like, I have a physical copy of Wind Through the Keyhole.
Yes.
Within arm's reach somewhere, but I haven't sat and read it because I wanted to read some of the more tangential ones like Hearts in Atlantis. Though I bought it and I read it for a page, and then I immediately bought Night Shift, so that's what I'm currently reading through now.
Ooh.
Because Children of the Corn is in it, and since there was a recent remake of it, I wanted to read the actual story.
It's excellent. Night Shift is actually one of my favorite collections. I think Everything's Eventual is probably still my fave, in spite of the fact that I love Different Seasons, which is kind of the one that's perennially referenced by everybody as far as short story collections, because that has Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption in it.
Oh,
that
it does?
That has The Body, which is what was Stand By Me, the film was based on.
Right.
It has Apt Pupil in it, and then Breathing Method.
Oh my goodness.
Those are the 4 stories that are in that. And so it's kind of everybody's seminal short story. But since I love 1408, and that's the story that really kind of got me immersed into the short story kick with Stephen King, I was like, yeah, Everything Eventual is probably still my
I didn't know that was also. I'm excited. I'm only in I'm still in the first one, Jerusalem's Lot. Which I didn't know that's what Chapelwaite is based on.
1408 is in Everything's Eventual. It's not in Night Shift.
Okay.
That's why I was like, Everything's Eventual is still my favorite. But no, the Chapelwaite basis running on that, like the Jerusalem's Lot is fascinating, particularly as like a prequel to Salem's Lot and seeing the connective tissue. And then you go back to the Dark Tower again. So everything flows to along the path of the beam, as we know. All things serve the beam. So yeah, really interesting, phenomenal stuff. Sorry, Doc, we didn't move into a tangent, was completely bypassing most of your knowledge at this point. But King is so much fun once you start getting layers deep.
No, I'm excited about it. I've bought a bunch of King stuff that's currently sitting on the Kindle, but just untouched, and has been for quite some time, just because other things are pressing on the time.
Of course.
But I wish that I had the time for it. But seeing your guys' excitement for it is making me like, oh man, I gotta like charge up the Kindle and at least try to read. I really should just try to, like, even if it's just 10 minutes a night or something like that.
It is worth it, and you'd be surprised how, like, especially like how engrossed you get in the book. Like, because live in, like, right now, I finished Carrie a couple weeks ago, and I hadn't even mentioned it to Shane yet. And I would love to have a conversation on it. But it's really cool. Like, I was reading it when we were making the, plug it up jokes. So like, it was perfect because I understood the literary reference. But yeah, like you say 10 minutes, but like when you start getting engrossed in a book, you'll read and then you'll be like, oh no, it's been 40. But then you'll be like, it's fine because it's enjoyable.
So yes and no. That's actually partially it too. Is that I know that I especially like that because I'm usually at I have to know what happens next, or let me get to the end of this chapter or something like that. And then I can't leave right then. I got to know like the next. Look, I'll read one more chapter, and then to your point, next thing I know, it's 45 minutes, an hour later, and that is actually part of what kind of stops me from reinvesting.
That's fair.
There is a Sarah Scribbles drawing that they have that's going to be on the out of print tees that they used, and it's one of my favorite images, which is it's kind of like pointing to insomnia, and she's like, oh, I can't sleep. I'll read a couple chapters, and it shows that it's dark, and looking at the book, and then the next picture is the same picture essentially, but the sun is peeking through and she's still reading the book. And I was like, yeah, that's essentially me. Once you get started, because as we joke, like if I get into a book and once the hooks get in, like I have the worst problem pulling myself away from it. This is why I wound up reading The Outsider in a day and running through a lot of those other books at lightning breakneck speed. Like I read The Gunslinger basically overnight the last time I read it, because I started on the 31st of December and was like, well, I'm just going to finish this before I go to bed. So yeah, it's really difficult for me to shake as well, but thankfully I did a little Lovecraft so that I knew they were shorter stories and I could kind of sparse, a little bit in before I got back into King. But I think I've got Bag of Bones next, and then I've got 12 books left, but I already pre-ordered the upcoming release this year, which, if you're not familiar, Michael, get excited.
It's another Holly one, right?
It is entitled Holly. It is, yes. So I have that pre-ordered. That will be winging its way to me in September once that is released. So I'm going to try to get as much under my belt as I can before then. But, a lot of fun. Still a lot of really fantastic, sort of iconic books in front of me, because I still have Rose Matter I have not read. Dolores Claiborne's in there that I have not read yet. So there's still a lot of really fun material for me to peruse. But see, look at that. We get talking about time, and all of a sudden, we are out of it. It just slides by like
crazy
grains of sand through your fingers, or sands through the hourglass, as it were.
These are the days of our lives.
Thank you, as the world turns. And so...
God.
I think we've managed to prove the joys of being meandering of the mind here. Once we get started talking, we just can't stop. It's a lot of fun. So if you enjoyed yourselves here, and we hope that you did, you can express that to us. Like, subscribe, rate, and review. We would love to hear from you. Of course, we do also have content on our social media that you can go and peruse. There's a link in the show notes that'll take you to all of our irrelevant information there, including our YouTube material, which we had last week's very fun spiritual exploration that we got to go into. But I have a future abstraction here that we can run for, in that, Michael, are you familiar at all with the professional wrestler by the name of Bray Wyatt?
No, that does not ring a bell.
Well, he is presently concocting a storyline which some people have indicated is on the run of a particular type of horror that you are very thrilled with.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So he's doing sort of like week by week storytelling where he's parsing out little bits of a story, and there are a lot of people who are likening it to the word just completely slipped my mind.
Analog horror?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. So some people are calling his storyline an attempt at analog horror, because he's just bringing in a bunch of very vague references that you're going to have to see the whole rich tapestry before you can figure out what's going on.
Is he still under the Fiend character?
No. So he has started a whole subsection of that, which kind of alludes to the entities that gave the Fiend its power initially, and goes beyond Sister Abigail and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of stuff to get into with setting up context, etc. But it would be very interesting to make Michael sit and have to watch these little vignettes and, try to gauge context. Because I'm not sure how much of the Firefly Funhouse we can get Michael to sit through. But the Firefly Funhouse has made a return in the most recent iteration here. And it's a little bizarre, but it's a lot of fun. The costuming is interesting, and he's a fantastic actor just to carry off a lot of this stuff, but it is a little meandering, and you don't get a decent idea where it's going. But
slow burns.
Exactly.
That's what, people call them nowadays, so it's okay.
And it leads to very fun things, like they had the Mountain Dew themed Lights Out match, where he came out in some weird like day glow material so that it had a design that was pushed onto his face when they turned the black light on, which was very entertaining. But matches are abysmal. Concept is fun to pay attention to, and there's where you find the rub.
Of course.
Well, you've got that as a feature after dark, and then I believe your fellow with the dog killing Nazis. The trailer for that.
Indeed, yes. We will have to find that. And I might even have an episode or two in the works here. So I had a couple ideas that sprang to mind as I was floating around. One of which was a discussion about, oh no, Michael's doing his goosebumps.
I got goosebumps.
Oh, no.
I literally got goosebumps.
I have been watching a lot of, and it's interesting we got into this. Thankfully, we are not stuck with a time limit, but I will sort of tease something going forward, and I had meant to talk about it, but we got on such a great tangent with the time travel question that we just never got back around to this. But in reviewing some material, I'm listening to the coverage of the West Memphis 3 that last podcast did, which brought up a lot of discussion about the Satanic Panic and the sort of fallout that was triggered by it, since these are children who were viewed by small town Arkansas folk as being Satanists, even though they were just, goth kids who were fond of, mother deities, etc. And were accused of murder with absolutely no context. If you're not familiar, I'm not sure how much time you've spent or if you encountered it during your research. Okay.
It sounds familiar, but not 100%.
Well, it'd be an interesting discussion if you get a wild hair, since I know you spent a lot of time looking at the Satanic Panic, but they also brought up in the course of that discussion, I had just watched the Night Stalker documentary on Netflix, and Richard Ramirez is another individual that people point to as a tipping point for the Satanic Panic, because he was drawing pentagrams at his crime scenes, and during his trial would yell out, "Hail Satan." He made people say, swear to Satan as opposed to saying swear to God, and played up a lot of his links. And they claim that is another major sort of undulation that pushed forward the Satanic Panic, because you have a serial killer who claims that he is being motivated by Satan to murder. And so interesting facets that we didn't talk about at all, I think, in the course of your episode, which would be fun for discussion's sake.
Ooh, that would be really cool. To delve into precursors to the panic, as opposed to talking about the main tipping, the main inciting incident.
Correct.
To see what led up to it. I like that. I think that'd be really cool.
The reverberations from it as well. So as it was happening, how it spitballed and went in other directions, as opposed to just, how it impacts D&D. It also impacts a lot of other things with people, being tried for crimes that they absolutely, depending upon what your perspective is, they did not commit. But some really grisly stuff, atrocities, but, where you can pin culprits for just saying, oh, he's a Satanist. And if someone's being incendiary and leaning into it, as a Satanist would tend to do, how quickly people are, rushing to condemn them. But in any event, so that was one thing. And then as I was looking in the course of that, there was a discussion about the last meals for inmates on death row.
Oh, okay.
And the history of that. And I went, wow, that would be a fun topic to get into, because it's something that is still somewhat ongoing, but not necessarily in all places, because in case you didn't know, they don't do it in Texas anymore. And there's a very fun story for that. Yeah.
Well, and there's dollar caps.
We are refusing to do that in Arizona as well.
Yes, and then there's some places that cap it at $40. There's some places that cap it at $20. So I mean, you're basically, it's a fascinating subject.
Wow.
Yeah, so, I know that a few states have the $20 cap, and it's well, it's not really much of a last meal then, right? On $20.
You can get a pizza maybe, and then you hopefully you don't tip. But
exactly.
It always amused me, with the people that deny their last thing, or have a choice of whatever, and then have and only eat a scoop of vanilla ice cream, for instance. I can't remember. One of the killers did that.
The reason that it's outlawed in Texas is a gentleman ordered something that was, it would have been an astronomical amount. It was probably hundreds of dollars worth of food. And then once it arrived, he said he wasn't hungry and didn't eat any of it.
Yeah, it's crazy to me and maybe it's just the fat kid in me thinking that though, but I'm you have a last meal. It's literally the last bit of joy you can have on this planet, and then you're gone. And I think like you just order 1 scoop of vanilla ice cream, or you order something like that, for instance, and then don't eat it. I'm like, what a wasted opportunity. This is your last moment of joy. I would milk that for every bit. I would eat until I couldn't eat anymore.
And maybe we might find out their,
Someone ate
motivations
themselves to
behind
death.
that. Well, but we might find out their motivations for that in that episode.
Indeed. And also Damien Eccles had talked about a pair of individuals that he saw while he was incarcerated, where one gentleman who actually committed a murder was perfectly fine, ate heartily, and was, sort of living it up, going to the chair. And the person who was, quote unquote, an accomplice, but was just purely guilty by association, was vomiting the entire evening, couldn't touch his last meal, and gave it to Damien because he was so nervous about his sudden demise that was imminent that he couldn't eat because he was terrified. So something to be said about that.
Again,
so interesting perspectives.
Yeah,
But so yes, there. Whereas I had been a dry socket for quite some time, I had some thoughts that occurred to me. So
if we end up going that route, we'll have to do another bit of like the time travel bit there, but in terms of like, what's your last meal?
Yeah,
that would be fun.
A good conversation.
Most certainly.
Be a good teaser for that topic.
Yes. So if that doesn't, lay a few breadcrumbs to entice you back to listening to future installments here as we crest towards episode 200, then see whether or not Michael's eyes are going to roll completely out of his head. But that's going to be around the time when he's going to be moving wayward to the Los Alamos thing. So that was one of the reasons why I had started kind of pushing a little cap for adjournment. But we'll talk about that later on as we get forward. But something to think about for all you folks out there. But I think that is going to officially put the cap or the nail in the coffin for this evening at the very least. But do check in with us over at the Tubes of You. As I alluded to, we have content winging your way every phenomenal Friday. And of course, new episodes of the podcast every lovely Monday on your preferred provider apps. You can check us out there. And I think we might have something for this Friday as well, if Michael is correct here. So
we have a plethora of things that we can address. I got at least one thing that we can talk about. So
tune in over at the Tubes of You. Find us there for more scintillating fare. But for the Disinformed podcast this week, I'm Shane.
And I'm
Michael. And zippity zoop, we're out of here.
Oh, it's painful.